Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to my channel. I'm sitting outdoors, so you might hear some loud noises, but ignore that and let's concentrate on the content. In this video I'm talking about lifting the veil of incorporation. We sometimes call it the skirt of incorporation or the sham of incorporation, just like you see the guy is lifting the lady's veil, his Mogole's veil. That's what we're talking about today, lifting the veil, looking under the corporate personality. The corporate personality veil, what is under there? When is that permitted? That's what we're covering today. So ever since the case of Salmon versus Salmon, we all know that Salmon versus Salmon is the leading case on the issue of corporate personality. In other words, that a company is a separate body from the members, from the shareholders in the company. Think of it like this box that exists, that is the company. And all the people, the employees, the members, the owners, the directors cannot be responsible, generally speaking, for the acts of the company. That is what corporate personality means. So there have been developed instances whereby this veil or this corporate personality is ignored and the courts look under what is inside, who was responsible. So they ignore this identity of the company and go behind to see who was actually responsible for these acts that the company has committed. That is what we call lifting the veil. It's also, like I said, called lifting the skirts or the sham or the personality of the company. And really the point is, they're saying that yes, the company is a separate legal person and the members or the shareholders are separate legal people, but we are going to go behind this company personality to see who actually did what we are talking about that has brought problems for the company. That's what lifting the veil is all about. So you find that the company probably is financially sinking, or a lot of money has been defrauded from the company and they want to pin people down. Who was it that did it? That's just an example of fraud. So in such instances, they say let's ignore the fact that the company is separate and we pursue the guys behind the company. That is what corporate personality is all about, with particular respect to lifting the veil. So we're now going to look a little bit more on this concept of lifting the veil. What is it? Section 1 of the Companies Act defines it as disregarding or ignoring the corporate or the company personality of a company so that in order to apportion or to allocate responsibility to the person who carries out an act. In other words, they are going to ignore that box, that company, that corporate personality. They are going to ignore it and go and see who is behind this act that we're complaining about. So this, in other words, such a situation, the law is looking at the people behind the company and they're ignoring this company position, this company cloak, this box I talked about, and they're going behind to dig in who brought down this company or who was responsible for the acts in this company. Now, lifting the veil is provided for in two scenarios. One is under the statute or the Companies Act, and the other is under case law. So these are the scenarios we're now going to look at. At what point or when do they look under the shell of corporation to see who's responsible or to ignore the corporate personality? Sometimes it's not just to see who's responsible. Sometimes you just want to say that this company is, yes, it's owned by another company, but want to separate two companies so that each company is looked at as on its own, as we're going to see. So we are going to look at the different ways in which the veil is lifted, in which the company personality is ignored and it is merged with the shareholders, or it is inquired into the shareholders. As you can see, I'm making this video on the go. So let us look at the different instances that the law, the statute provides that concern or that permit lifting the veil. One of the first instances where the number of members in the company falls below the legal minimum. Remember, the legal minimum for public companies is 7 people, 7 members, and private companies is 2 members. So the law says that if you run a company below membership, they will lift the veil. They will look beyond the company to see who was responsible for running this company below membership, and that person will be penalized. The second instance is where the company is not mentioned in the bill of exchange. So you see this check. This is an example of a bill of exchange, the check. The company names are usually supposed to be below here, around there, if you see the cursor around there. So every checkbook is issued with the company name right there, and whoever signs is deemed to be signing on behalf of the company. So should you issue a check that doesn't have the company name and that check bounces, they will come for you personally. They will ignore the corporate personality of the company to say that the check was issued by the company, and they will say you issued that check in your own names because it was not with the name of the company in the bill of exchange or in the check. So that is the second instance where the law says that they will lift the veil of incorporation. So one, if you run a company under minimum. Two, if you don't mention the company's name in the bill of exchange, they will come for you and they'll ignore the personality of the company and they come for the people who made the company. So another instance where the veil will be lifted is with respect to holding and subsidiary companies. Remember, a holding company is a company that has ownership in the subsidiary companies. Like if you see this picture I put here, the Alarm Group. Alarm Group is a holding company and it owns all these other small companies. So these are subsidiaries. And Alarm is a holding company and the subsidiaries are these other ones. So you'll find that when they are presenting accounts, they'll present accounts of all the companies, both the holding company and the subsidiary companies together. They will not separate the legal personality of Alarm Group from those of the ones it owns. They submit all of them at the same time. So they ignore the corporate personality of Alarm Group, the holding company, and they consider it as one with the subsidiaries, the smaller ones that it owns. So that is when lifting the veil happens for holding and subsidiary companies. Now, when they're investigating into related companies, if they're investigating a company that has another ownership, membership elsewhere, they'll still lift the veil and they'll inspect that other company. For example, let's assume they are investigating Speak Munyonyo. It's owned by Sudil and they are investigating it. There might be a need to also look into Gold Trust, which is also owned by Sudil. So in that case, they will investigate Gold Trust and they investigate the Munyonyo company as well, the Speak Munyonyo company, even though they are two separate legal entities. So in that way, they're investigating into another related company and they're ignoring the corporate personality of Gold Trust and the corporate personality of Speak Munyonyo because they want to investigate them. So the law allows the veil of each of these companies to be lifted for purposes of investigation or inspection. So lifting the veil under taxation. Now with taxation, usually they tax a company depending on where it's resident or where the majority shareholders sit. To be able to know whether your company is a Ugandan company, they look at the shareholding. For example, supposing I have a company that I co-own with an American, okay? I have 30% of the shares and the American has 80%. Usually in law, they will look at who owns majority shareholding. The company will be deemed, generally speaking, the company will be deemed to be a shareholder. The majority shareholder will be deemed to be the sort of owner of the company. So that company will be deemed to be an American company because the majority shareholder is in America, is an American. So you'll find that here with respect to taxation, the veil is lifted. They look inside the company to see who is the majority shareholder, or where does the company sit for its meetings, or what is the controlling country, and that will be the country that will be used for taxation purposes, because they don't want to tax a company twice. They don't want to tax it in Uganda and then they also tax it in America. So for residence purposes, to determine where that company is resident, they usually lift the veil so that they can tell where it's resident, so that it pays the taxation or the taxes of its residence, of the country of residence. So lifting the veil under taxation is simply that they lift the corporate personality, they ignore the company as an entity and go behind it to see who is behind this company or where is this company's residence, and that is what is used to tax the company. Now with respect to fraud, if a company has fraudulent practices, they're going to go behind the company and say who actually committed this fraud. So they'll ignore the corporate personality or that box of the company, and they'll go behind and say, okay, who actually did this fraud? And they'll pursue everyone who was involved in that fraud. So with respect to fraud, they ignore the company and they go and pursue the people behind the company. So they ignore the corporate, that box, the corporate personality, and they go for the person behind the company. Lifting the veil as an agent. Let's assume I have a company that I create, okay? My company is called ABC Company Limited, and I use it to do things for me. If anything is wrong with that company, they are going to ignore its corporate personality and they will say this company was working for who? who is behind the company. Because that company is my agent, they'll ignore it as a company, as a person, a legal person, and they'll come for the person behind it. So with agency, if a company is acting on behalf of another person or another entity, they can ignore the corporate personality of that company. Let's look at this case. Read FG Films. It's a good example of that principle that I'm talking about. Here, an American company, it provided all the funds for producing a film. So pretty much it's funding everything. Then it decided to register itself as a British film. So they are Americans, but they're registering as Britons. On the ground, the film was produced by a British company that owned 90%, that was owned by 90% American. In other words, Americans held the majority shareholding, they are funding it, but they registered it on the ground as a British film. What did the court say? Court said that the British company was a mere agent of the American company, which was a true make of the film. So here they ignored the corporate personality of the British company that has been established, and they looked behind that who is actually behind this company. Then they found that it is actually the Americans, because they were the ones funding it, they were the ones all the majority shareholders. So where a company acts as an agent for another, the law says that that company will be ignored and they'll go behind it and look at the people behind that company. Now, if a company is a trustee of shareholders, it's pretty much like agency. But here they are the trustee, in other words, they are holding something for the shareholders, or they are being agents again for the shareholders. In such an instance, they are going to ignore the corporate personality of the company and they'll go and see who is behind it. So case law also provides for lifting the veil under fraud or improper conduct. Just like the explanation of fraud that exists under statutory law, even the case law, once there is fraud, it will permit someone to lift the veil. And let's look at this case of Guilford so that you understand what we're talking about. So the case is that the defendant was the plaintiff's former employee. So Horn was a former employee of Guilford Motor Company Limited. While he was an employee, he signed an agreement and agreed not to steal its customers if he left their employment. Later, he then forms his own company and steals the customers. So he's using his new company to steal the customers. His argument will be that I'm not the one stealing the customers are coming to the company. We are two separate entities. Both the company and the defendant were held responsible for breaking that covenant of not to steal clients. So the court says that the company that Horn had formed was a mere cloak or sham, and was used for the purpose of enabling him to commit breach of the covenant. In other words, they ignored the fact that the company was a legal entity, and they say that the company exists but was created to commit fraud. Because of that, we are going to ignore the company and come for you personally. Even residence, it's the same point that I talked about taxation. To determine where a country is resident, case law also says to determine residence or where a company is existing, they ignore the corporate personality and see who are the shareholders, who are the majority meetings held, who is a controlling authority, and that will determine where the country is resident for tax purposes. Because taxation is based on the residence of the company. If it's an American company, even though it's registered in Uganda, but its residents or its majority shareholders, decision makers are in America, it will be deemed to be an American company and to not be taxed in Uganda. That is to try and avoid double taxation, etc. So case law also says that for purposes of residence, they will ignore the corporate personality of the company and they will go and see who actually owns this company. So this video was made on special request, and I promised that I would send it in today. That is why I have made it on the go. Any opportunity I would have, I would make it so that I have it in time for you today. Like I said, it was made on special request today. I was teaching a class and they said, please give us a video on this. Good enough, I had some material on it, so I just put together something as I was going through the day, and here we are. In summary, lifting the veil is an exception to corporate personality. Corporate personality is the main principle. A company is separate and distinct from its shareholders, but in certain exceptions, that principle will be ignored and the company personality will be ignored, and they'll go behind the company to see who are actual owners, who committed this fraud, who did this. They'll ignore the company to be able to say these are two different companies. We investigate in both companies because they are related. I hope this video has helped you understand the topic better.